And I remember stepping into a doorway.
There's always one.
And I just literally look from here to where that puddle is away, and there's, with a smile on his face,
Yep.
with an AK, and let rip.
Anytime, you know, one of those guys popped up, you were chasing him down. He actually said, "I'm Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, and I want to negotiate." And he's behind the sights, and he's just clicking the T&E. Click, 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 like he's dialing in on something. And it made the hairs like on the back of my neck stand up, like, man, it's about to go down. Yeah, so I think we're a generation apart, so yeah, you're a little bit older than me, but...
No, but does that allow me to have a walking stick right now?
No.
Or is that just experience we're
No,
talking about?
no, but we definitely have some overlap, so I'm curious to hear some of the stories that you've got and talk about, you know, kind of our path and how we got here.
Let's go back to growing up, I suppose. What was that like for you? Where did you grow up?
Sure, I grew up on the East Coast of the States, Delaware, small town upbringing. My interest in the military came pretty early. I had both my grandfathers, my mom's dad and my dad's dad were both in World War II.
Okay.
And my mom's grandfather, or my mom's father in particular, I got him at an age where, you know, World War II guys didn't typically talk about stuff. I was young and he was old enough that he finally started sharing some of those stories. And when he would tell me stories from World War II, he just talked about it like with such reverence. Like I'd see his eyes light up. You know, he missed his mates, but whether he was telling a good story or a bad story, he was really excited to share it with me. And I think that's what really lit the fire for me and kind of sparked my interest at an early age in the military.
What were you like as a kid? Were you a good kid, good education, good family stuff? And
yeah, good family. I mean, parents got divorced at a pretty early age. Not a bad childhood. I was a bit of a troubled kid as a teenager. I was probably good when I was little. But, you know, as I got a little bit older, got into drinking and kind of having fun. When you're from a small town, you got nothing to do but get in trouble, so I tended to a little bit. But, yeah, sports kind of kept me on the straight and narrow a little bit and kind of kept me doing enough of the right things that I didn't get in too much trouble.
Well, me, I grew up in a council estate in the West Midlands into a family of 5. I was a middle child, and I always tell people, anybody that's a middle child, we're slightly different, and we were. It was a loving family. It was a very poor family. It was gangs where I grew up, and I remember starting from the age of 9, I started getting in a lot of trouble. I started to want to be the guy who had the reputation for being a tough guy, thinking that was the way to go, and it wasn't. So long story short, from 9, got into gangs. 11, I was already in juvenile court for actual bodily harm, grievous bodily harm, fighting basically.
Yeah.
And then by 13, thinking I was cool being in a gang, had a great idea while I was at school, and the idea was this, to be the big boy. I glued the maths teacher to the chair, and it didn't go down too well, and I got thrown out of school. And really, I never really went back. And then by 15, the gang warfare thing got a bit wild, and I ended up in a fight, and I got stabbed. I got stabbed in the back and nearly died.
No shit.
Whilst I was recovering, I was lying there in the hospital bed, and I remember looking at my mum and dad and thinking, I've got to get out of this. I've got to stop this.
This is at 15?
Yeah, 15. Yeah. It's not me, the pain I'm in, it's the pain I could see in their faces. And I thought, this is just not right. And I knew what I was doing, you know, I had no one else to blame. I was the problem. And it was then that I decided, I've got to get into the military. I knew it was going to be difficult, I knew it was going to be hard, and I always said to myself, I have to be here, I need to be here. It was that light that was going to save me, and it was.
Yeah. You know, like I said, I was a kid that got in trouble quite a bit. I drank fairly young, and I just knew inside me that if I went to college, I was going to piss it away. So the military, definitely probably my junior year, probably about 17 years old.
Yeah.
It really started to get into my head as something that I wanted to go do. And so I did. I enlisted, same thing, infantry. I had an airborne contract out of the gate. So went to basic training immediately out of high school in 1995.
Where was that? Where did you go? Where was your training?
Fort Benning, Georgia is where they do infantry basic training in the States. Yeah. And so, yeah, basic training, then off to airborne school. And while I was in airborne school, I volunteered for the Ranger Indoctrination Program, so the 3-week course to...
So that's the selection process as well, isn't it, to go into the Rangers?
It is. It's different now. Now it's a completely different program and much longer, and they do a lot more training. Yeah. But back then it was kind of just to see what you were made of and if you could hack it in the regiment. So I ended up doing that twice. It's something you'll find out about me is I failed everything once. But yeah, I got recycled because I missed a formation, and so they made me do it again.
Right.
But luckily they didn't kick me out. They gave me a second shot, and I went through, and my first duty station was 3rd Ranger Battalion. Just to back up a little bit, you know, you had a pretty rough childhood, you know, coming up. What do you think what effect did that have on you going into the military? Do you think that prepared you? Were you more mentally tough because of some of those challenges? Like, how do you feel about that?
I'll tell you what, mate, I think it gave me the best foundation I could have ever had. It definitely prepared me. The hardship of, I used to walk to school every morning, didn't have the money to get the bus, so walking and being kind of fit was natural to me.
Yep.
Being cold and wet was natural to me. And these are all the things, as you'll remember, going through training, it's that being uncomfortable and being pushed through your limits. I'd already been through all that. I'd had a tough life of, being deprived of food. So it really did it gave me great foundations. Where some of that I did notice, some of the other kids that had come, they'd had a more charmed lifestyle, I would say.
Yeah.
And they fell by the wayside pretty quick. And I did notice that. I would say 80% of the people that started and finished with me came from very similar backgrounds.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, similar. I wouldn't classify my childhood as rough, but there were some experiences that I had as a young kid that I think impacted me. And one of them, it's kind of a funny story. I talked about playing baseball. My old man was a college baseball coach, so I was around it from a very early age. I was exposed to it a lot. And my dad was watching me field ground balls one day.
Yeah.
And he hit me like a hard line drive, and I kind of moved out of the way. And he said, "Are you afraid of the ball?" And I said, "Well, I don't want to get hit." And he said, "Come on, we're going to play catch." So we started, about 50 feet apart. And he said, "I want you to throw the ball at me and hit me dead in the chest as hard as you can." So, all right. So I threw it as hard as I could. He catches it. He said, "Now I'm going to do the same to you." Threw it at me, and I caught it. And I mean hard. My old man could bring it. And then he said, "Now I want you to take a step closer, and I want you to do it again. And we're going to repeat that until you can't take it anymore." Well, I was terrified. I was terrified I was going to eat a baseball in the face from my old man. But what it did was it taught me to overcome that fear, and that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
And I think I applied that for the rest of my life. Anytime that I had some reservations about something, or I was worried about something, it taught me that if I just practice and I work at it, that I can work through it until I won't feel or won't have those hesitations about it. And I think I carried that through my military career.
When we started, as a young 17-year-old kid, there was 70 of us that started. And I remember the memories I have about that are this, turning up on this parade square, never been out of my hometown before.
Yeah.
Thinking I was a big fish, a tough guy, and now all of a sudden I'm amongst real warriors.
Yeah.
And it was 1983, just after the Falklands War, so all my instructors had all been in
had
conflict.
combat experience, yeah.
Yeah, and no-nonsense people, But I remember standing day one, looking at my instructor, who'd still got a fresh scar on his face, got shot in the face.
From the Falklands,
and I just thought, there was something about it. He had this aura around him of respect, and I just said to him, I remember there was a 17 spotty kid going, how I feel about that man there is how I want people to feel about me.
That level of respect,
yeah. And I said, no, I know this is going to be hard. I cannot fail this. I have to do this. But I looked down the line and I thought, everybody was twice as big as me, or seemed to be.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Big arms, airy chests. And I was thinking, I've bit off more than I can chew here.
Yeah.
I ain't going to make it. But then I thought, I cannot go back to the lifestyle I had. And the other thing that kept me going was my dad saying to me, he'll be home in a few days. And I thought, I'm not going to give him
Oh, do you think he was challenging you, or do you think he didn't believe you could do it?
No, he was challenging me. He knew I was that stubborn.
Yeah.
And he knew that's what I needed.
He just needed to piss you off a little bit.
Yeah, and it was for the right reasons. And, I'm grateful for him for it now. But anyway, the long story short of all that training and everything we did, at the end of training, 70 of us started, 7 of us finished, and that was it.
Wow.
And the other lessons I learned from that was, being a kid from a council estate, I'd never seen a plane on the ground, aeroplane. The only time I've seen an airplane, it was flying over.
Right.
And now I'm in this unit where I'm on the back of a plane and I'm getting thrown out of it every time I got in it.
Yeah.
And I never landed in a plane at this stage of my life.
You only jumped out of it.
Every time I didn't jump, I got thrown out of it. And this was my new life. So, I'm at that point in my life, 17 years old, now really believing in myself, realising what a prat had been, an idiot growing up, thinking I was tough. And I had respect for the people, for everything. And I just wanted to further that career. And I just knew, I'll be here forever. This is what I wanted to be. And that's how I felt.
So you knew even then you were going to make a career of it and stay the whole time?
Yeah, I knew I had to. I mean, I was always thinking, what comes next? When will I reach the ceiling of doing everything I want to do? As a soldier, you probably felt the same. I wanted, not that war is good or conflict, it's horrendous, but I wanted to be challenged.
Yeah.
Because the ultimate challenge for us, as soldiers is being put in a situation where you got to make those decisions, and our decisions are life and death.
Yeah, similar experience in that. So I got assigned to 3rd Ranger Battalion. 3rd Ranger Battalion, Bravo Company specifically, were the ones that were involved in Somalia in 1993. When I got to regiment, there were these guys around that had all, like you and the guys at the Falklands, had just come out of probably the biggest combat experience since Vietnam.
Yeah.
You know, you look around and all these guys had, you know, they wore combat infantryman badges and they had mustard stains on their wings, guys that jumped into Grenadier or Panama. So it was the same kind of thing. You were kind of inspired by that excellence and those guys that actually proved their mettle, you know, in a real world situation. Like, it wasn't that I necessarily wanted to go to war or something. And when I came in, it was still peacetime Army, but it was, you know, you don't want to practice and never play the game. And I felt like if I'm going to dedicate my life to this and put this much into it, that I want to get in the game and I want to play at some point. Little did I know it would happen a handful of years later.
How long had you been in the military at this stage?
So came in 95, I was in the 82nd, now we're right up to about 2000. So about 5 years.
So for me, I'd now reached the 9-year point of being in the parachute regiment. I'd finished off all the sort of operational deployments and I got sent back to the recruiting depot as an instructor. I did 2 years there, but then I thought I want to be challenged again. I had that buzz, I need to be challenged, I want to see. And obviously we knew a little bit about the SAS, but not enough really to formulate, is this going to be for me or not for me? But I decided, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'll never forget day one, stood there, freezing cold, frosty morning, looking across at 5 o'clock in the morning, everybody else, 283 people now. And again, they all look bigger, stronger and better. And I'm saying to myself, what am I doing? Why have I done this? You know, and I started almost talking myself out of it, thinking I've got no chance. Look at him, you know. And then probably like yourself, the days go by, the weeks go by, the lines get smaller, and you start to grow and believe in yourself.
Sure.
So for us, selection starts, it's broken into phases. We call it the hills phase, the mountains, which is for a month. You know, you're going over start off in a team of 4 for a couple of days, learning to navigate properly, carrying weight, but you have to, you know, hit a certain speed, going up and down the mountains, etc. After about 2 or 3 days, you're then in pairs. After another 2 or 3 days, you're on your own. And then for the rest of the month, it's navigating long distances, more weight, you know, day, night, time, no matter what the terrain, and you had to, you know, pass these tests at a certain speed. If you were 1 second over, you got what you called a red. And then the next day, you couldn't afford another red. You had 2 reds, you were off.
But do you know, are you aware that you got a red?
Yeah,
okay.
You are aware. So you know which adds the pressure to you. Because you're getting up the next morning knowing I've got to smash this out of the bag. So at this stage, I'm going through selection. A lot of people fell by the wayside. We're down to less than half the course now at the end of the hills phase, and we're off to the jungle. And the jungle's about 5 weeks where it's basic soldiering, basic complex navigation, because the jungle's hard to navigate. But the thing about the jungle is, I always said, that is selection. We're not really interested in really what happens on the hills. This is just a filtering phase to get people to that stage. And what they're looking at is you. What you like under pressure, what you like once you peel back, you know, deprivation, food deprivation, really uncomfortable, you know, making mistakes. It's how you bounce back from it. You're being watched to see what your true character is, because that's what they're looking for. You know, the regiment, it becomes very apparent, it's not about an image. It's about the person who's got that mentality of, yeah, all right, I messed up there, I won't do it again, I'll learn from it, I'll go forward and I'll find a solution and not give up. And that was the jungle. But for 5 solid weeks, you know, you're doing it every single day, and there's no encouragement or discouragement. So you're not getting a pat on the back saying, well done, you did well today, or you did bad. So you don't know.
It's all up to you.
They're allowing you to battle with your own mind, because that's what they want to see, because, you know, they want to see how you bounce back as opposed to flying through everything. Anyway, so that was by the end of the jungle, you're lucky if you've got 10, 15 people left.
Out of the original 2-something.
Yeah. And then the next phase is continuation training, and finally combat survival and interrogation, which sorts out the last lot. We started with 283, I think it was, and we finished, again, that number, 7 of us, 7 or 8 probably, but I think it was 7 of us finished at the end. You know, so the the full fall away rate was massive. What's the process with you guys now? Is it similar? Or?
Similar but different, yeah. So like you talked about the beginning phase, you called it the mountain phase.
Yeah.
Very similar. It's in a mountainous environment in the eastern half of the United States in the Appalachian Mountains. Land navigation is the tool that's used to assess. Different on the front end in that a little less people. It's probably 110, 120 guys a class. There's some prerequisites to get there, so you have to be asked to attend. You have to apply and be asked to attend.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what it is today, but back then it was like minimum 4 years of service.
Yep.
You had to have a certain score on your physical training tests. You had to take an IQ test and have a certain level there. But yeah, there were some precursors to kind of weed out the people that don't belong there. And then you move on to individual assessment, which is, moving long distances. I think the biggest difference there probably is we don't know. We don't know where we stand in it. We don't know if we were fast enough that day, if we were too slow that day. You finish the day and they tell you to get on the truck to take you to wherever you're sleeping, and the truck either takes you back to the barracks and you're done, or it takes you to a camp in the woods and drops you off and you're at least there for one more day.
So it's that psychological hangman.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so I think that's the tough part is on the front end is
not knowing.
You just don't know. So it's how fast do I move when I don't know when the day's going to end? Do I go all out and then risk running out of gas? Do I keep a little in reserve?
Yeah.
I think the challenge is to push yourself as hard as you can that is also sustainable. Because you don't know when it's going to finish. They've had classes where only one guy finished, and they've had classes where 10 or 15 guys have finished. But I think the average overall is about 9 or 10%. When you were in selection, was there a point where you hit a wall and you were like, man, I don't know if I'm going to get through this?
Yeah, it used to be about 500 hours every morning. You get it all piss wet through.
Like an old man, and then you get moving and it got better.
I think on every phase, if you're honest with yourself, there's moments where you just think, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
I could be sat in a cafe, I could be sat at home with the kids and having a cup of tea or something. But I think what drove me was, one, I didn't want to fail, of course, but two, when people fell by the wayside, it gave me inspiration. It lit the next fire for me to go, well, he's gone, I'm definitely going to outdo the next one.
It's like when you're running and you pass somebody and you just feed off of their weakness.
Well, that's funny you should say that, because on the hills phase, I was one of the fastest on the hills.
Yeah.
There was a couple of us, of course, and what kept me going, every time I saw somebody in front of me, that became my target.
Yep.
And I thought, right, I have to get past that person. And I used to have this tune in my head, ain't never going to break my style, nobody's going to slow me down. And I'd be saying that to myself and then go, bang, I'm after him. Take him out, then the next one. But then all through that process, and particularly the jungle, being uncomfortable, and no one really likes to be uncomfortable. You're a liar if you say you do. You get up, you're putting your pitch black, putting your wet clothes back on with leeches all over the place, and it stinks of piss because of the ammonia in it. And it's really horrible and uncomfortable, and you just felt, why am I doing this? But then very well, for us, we get down to the schoolhouse and there'd be a couple of hands up going, I want to leave, and you'd be like, that gave me the energy to go, right, I'm staying.
I'm still here.
But there was loads of moments like that, for sure, though I just thought, I'm probably spent right now.
Yeah.
I'm done, physically, emotionally, I'm over this. But then it was just that, take a breath, think about it, I'm going to do it. What about yourself? Did you?
I failed.
Did you?
I did. Yeah, the first time I went through, I made it to the day before the last event, if you will.
Whoa.
The day before the 40-miler. And I got pulled, and I was told failure to meet the time standard. Like I said, you don't know. In they call it an exit interview, but it's where someone from the leadership basically sits you down and talks to you a little bit about your performance at selection. They asked me if I would return, which I took as a huge positive. So it was a moment of enlightenment where I was like, okay, well, I must have done well enough that they at least want to see me come back.
Yeah. And
then as I left, I think I kind of thought to myself, maybe they're just testing me. Maybe they're just seeing if I'll come back and do it all again. That was incredibly motivating. Like you said, watching the guys fall away. And I was so junior to most of the guys that were in the course. They were senior Green Berets and senior Rangers, guys that were a large portion of them 8 or 10 years older than me. So it was motivating, and I ended up coming back. I waited a year and went at the same time of year because I wanted the conditions to look the same, maximize, the benefit of seeing it a second time. And then, lo and behold, the second time around, I was successful. And so I was so in shock when it happened at the end. I didn't even have a smile on my face when they basically said, hey, we're going to take a chance on you, and you're going to move on to the operator training course. I just sort of stood there, and then one of the senior non-commissioned officers, one of the sergeant majors, grabbed me by the arm and he said, it's all right, you can smile now.
I'll tell you what, mate, I've got to say, I admire you for going back. I remember at the end of selection, I was like 2 stone lighter. I'd been half-eaten alive by fucking everything in the jungle. And I stood there and I thought, I don't care if I fucking fail. I am not doing that again.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah.
That was it. And
Yeah,
I was still young, but I'm like, I ain't doing that again. Luckily.
Same. Yeah, I mean, you are spent at the end. And I think we were similar. Back then I weighed like 135 pounds. I was a skinny, wiry little kid compared to most of the people there. But yeah, definitely spent at the end of it.
But again, probably similar to yourself, at the end of it, for us, there's no parade, it's okay, well done, you've passed. Yep. You're going here, you're doing this, you're doing that, You get your berry, you get your belt, and you're proud within. I think at that stage, you're still pretty in a severe state of recovery.
Sure.
Your body's smashed, your mind's smashed, so it's like, there's no room for jumping around and go, oh, great, we've passed this. But it is a great feeling to know that you've passed. You're now joining this unit. They're 1% of 1% in the world that can be in this family. So it was a great experience. And then you get sent off to your squadrons. And then really, to be honest, that's when this whole new world opened up to me. Okay, so obviously past selection, you then went to your squadron, which was what, C Squadron?
C Squadron, yeah.
Yeah, and where were they and what did you get up to?
They were deployed when I got assigned to squadron, when I crossed the hall.
So straight into a baptism of fire?
Straight into it. Honestly, it was probably the best thing that ever could have happened, because when you join your mates on a deployment in the middle of combat, like, they're almost forced to take you in. There's no bullshit in the way. And I think they really did that. My teammates, when I got to Afghanistan, which was literally about a week and a half after graduating the course, I was on a plane headed overseas. But, those guys took me in, they made sure my kit was right, they made sure I was prepared. So by the time, we went out on the first mission, like, I felt integrated into the team. We had done a couple of training runs together. I think the biggest eye-opener for me getting to squadron, especially in combat, was we went and did some close quarter battle runs, some CQB runs. And I thought I was fast coming out of school, and then I saw these guys that were just lightning fast. They were moving on instinct. They were communicating without communicating. I think it was just all those little nuanced things that a team of guys that has worked together like that well and for that long, I think that was the next big adjustment for me. But yeah, so joined them straight in Afghanistan. It was a mild deployment. You had the beginning of Afghanistan right after 9/11, where guys were getting after it, and Tora Bora and all that stuff happened. And then C Squadron was like the second rotation. So by the time I got there, all those bad guys had gone to ground, intelligence had dried up. So I think the entire time I was there, so it was my first combat deployment, I think we only did about 6 hits. Right. And they were relatively mild. So looking back on it, I was grateful for that I didn't get in some big gunfight on my very first trip over. But yeah, it was definitely a unique experience to join a team like that while they're deployed. Yeah.
I mean, for me, I finished selection, went straight to my squadron, B Squadron. We were on the counter-terrorist team at the time in the UK, so we were responsible for anything terrorism
domestic, right?
Related. And yeah, so it was straight into, I wouldn't say baptism of fire, but we had stuff going on.
Yeah.
Operations going on, and being fed straight into a team, just like yourself. You came in, said who you were, and just expected to pick up and go with the guys, and we did. For me, it was, I wouldn't say challenging, it was exciting just to be part of that team and watch, like you're saying, watching the swept up drills that these people have got, but being accepted right away because you're part of that team. So there was that going on, and then the next sort of deployment, which happened pretty quickly, was the war in Bosnia. Seeing the stuff that I saw out there and what was going on was a real eye-opener to war and conflict. It was very complex, but you're seeing the sort of genocide and all that sort of stuff going on, and we're doing what we do, surveillance and reporting it and all that sort of stuff. But it was an unusual role in terms of we weren't out there war fighting. We were just monitoring and reporting ground truth, which was a great start to the career with the squadron, you know. But you're in these horrendous situations where you're being shot at, getting blown up, going through minefields, but you're not in a position to be fighting because you don't know who you're supposed to be fighting for or against.
Yeah.
I remember on one situation coming across just like this, walking, we were going through a village that had just been smashed, and, you know, it was still on fire and all this sort of stuff. And on the way out, there was an orchard, and I just saw this big pile of something covered in blue tarpaulin. And I was like, you could smell death. And I was like, right, let's stop the vehicle. So anyway, long story short, I remember going in there, pulling this tarpaulin, it was just piles of bodies.
Yeah.
And it was bodies that had been killed a week ago up to probably hours ago before we got in.
And you can't get that smell off you.
No,
Yeah.
and that visual, I could still get it now, but for me, it's like my first real taste of conflict and war at that scale.
Yep.
And I was like looking at all these bodies thinking, how the hell does this happen?
Yeah.
You know, because a lot of them, the bottom pile was soldiers, then it was civilians and children, all sorts of stuff. And I just thought, how the hell does it get to this situation? You know, so that was my sort of first baptism of conflict and war, and it was one that sticks with me forever.
I actually have something similar.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a part of the unit. We deployed to Afghanistan. Afghanistan kind of was what I thought it would be.
Yeah.
You know, we did your standard hits. We did some reconnaissance and surveillance, but it was about like I had trained for. And then we came home from that rotation, and lo and behold, now Iraq is spinning up. And there's talk of us invading the country of Iraq. And it ended up being our squadron that was the squadron tasked with doing the long-range desert mobility out of the Western Desert. That is not something. I think you guys do a really good job of training in a lot of those different aspects, but desert mobility was not something that we had learned about or prepared for. So we had to prepare for it before the deployment. And so we ended up deploying, you know, that was way outside of the box for me, but now here I am driving a vehicle with my mates and the rest of the squadron vehicles across the desert of Iraq, and we're sort of rolling up and hitting targets, you know, every night along the way. But the first real or surreal moment that I think I had, like I said, we had hit some things, but they were all kind of standard fare, was one morning. It was 2 April, so very early on into the war. We had drove all night long and the sun had come up, and typically we would hide before the sun came up, find a wadi or a depression to get in. But in this particular case, we kept driving, and we passed a sheep herder out in the desert. And, you know, even when it happened, we all kind of talked about it in the vehicle, like, that's probably not good. Like, hopefully that guy doesn't go tell anybody that he saw us. Well, the next thing I know, it's, you know, we had put out some security, just light security, because we're in the middle of nowhere. And I was sleeping next to the vehicle, and my buddy wakes me up and he says, "Hey, get up, get your kit on." I'm like, "All right, what's going on?" He's like, "I don't know, I think we got some enemy moving on our position." And I look up, and you want to talk about a surreal moment, but the guy on the vehicle next to us is on the 50 cal on top of the vehicle. And you know, you got the pintle mount on the bottom and the little T&E. And he's behind the sights, and he's just clicking the T&E. Click, 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 like he's dialing in on something. And it made the hairs like on the back of my neck stand up, like, man, it's about to go down. And of course, the next thing I know, you know, everybody, all hell breaks loose and gunfire. And you know, we ended up in, long story short, we ended up in a prolonged gunfight for several hours that day. We had a lot of close air support that we brought in. But the other thing from that day that really boggled my mind was, you know, we were attacked by an overwhelming number of bad guys. And they had nothing but small arms and RPGs. And we had jets with bombs. And we kept dropping bombs, and they just kept coming. And it was hard for me to wrap my head around that. Like was coming to kill me so important to them that they were willing to cross open desert with planes dropping bombs on them to do it. And they were. We had our first casualty of the war that day. And it was, again, a surreal moment. It was the first time I ever heard Eagle Down over the radio. And that, you know, one of our guys had been hit.
Was he killed or was he injured?
Nah, he was killed through and through.
Right.
It was before we were wearing side plates.
Yeah.
But a couple other guys were injured. And then, you know, we medevac those guys out, and then we continued the mission. And I just remember thinking, 1, I can't believe I'm here. 2, I can't believe all this just happened. And then 3, well, this is just what we do.
Yeah.
And we hopped back on the vehicles and we moved out and we
It's
continued
part of the
mission.
business, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a different experience, and until you're there, you don't really understand.
But, you know, people always ask, have you had any close, tight issues where you've, you know, been lucky to walk away? I think every single day we used to have what we call the Glad to be Alive Club.
Yeah.
Where you'd either been shot at or frigging blown up or a combination of both.
Right.
And, you know, I remember one particular time going into a room. We're clearing the house top to bottom. We had teams coming from the bottom, somebody hit in the middle, we coming from the top. And as we come down, we'd already blown in, so I thought, there's never going to be anybody alive in this anyway. And I remember stepping into a doorway.
There's always one.
And I just literally look from here to where that puddle is away, and there's, with a smile on his face,
Yep.
with an AK, and let rip.
Yep.
And for whatever reason, it was either fucking blind or the look of the gods on my side that day. The rounds, about 6 rounds, went between my chin and my weapon and through my sight and into the wall. And the sight exploded in my face. And then I felt a hand on my back and they pulled me back out the room. And I was like covered in fucking blood.
Yep, that close.
Yeah, but that day as well, which is weird, I wore glasses. I never wore glasses because it irritate me. And luckily I did, because I've still got the glasses now.
Frag.
It's just, I'd have been blinded.
Yep.
And anyway, went back into the room and dealt with that, and didn't happen again. But
Yeah, I think people always ask how many times have you been in a situation like that, and honestly the number gets to be,
it's every day.
yeah.
You just
Yeah.
forget about it.
I don't think a lot of people realize how closely we really work together, and intelligence is shared, and you know, we kind of split targets up when we're deployed. Did you ever have any experiences, you know,
Yeah,
working with the other side?
a hell of a lot of it, mate. I mean, you think about it, from the start, you know, forming of your unit, we've always been sort of crossing over anyway with the training,
Right.
experiences. We share our stuff, you share ours. So that's always grown. But in the latter years, over the last 20 years, you know, fighting the war on counter-terrorism, we've shared a lot of stuff. And I think you and I have actually worked on the same sort of ground space, battle space, if you like, out in Iraq.
I'm sure that we have.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of crossovers, and still today, I think that, you know, we sort of bouncing in and out of locations with each other and working together hand in hand, sharing intelligence, supporting each other on whatever task, mission that may be. I mean, going back to your experience of doing that, and I've particularly mentioned there Iraq, can you remember the sort of stuff you were working against out there?
Yeah, well, post-invasion, you know, I did the invasion, and then I came home. We were bumped out, and I came home for about 6 months. My second rotation was probably in fall of 2003.
Yeah.
And so by the time I got back for that one, we were full on chasing the deck of cards, every mission out. It was 24/7, so you'd run a
Yeah.
daylight mission, you'd run a nighttime mission. You were lucky if you get 2 or 3 hours in between them, but anytime, you know, one of those deck of cards guys popped up, you were chasing them down. And then, yeah, fast forward a little bit, December 12th of 2003, we were doing a hit right outside the green zone, you know, the houses where we lived.
Yeah.
Honestly, it was only a few miles down the road from there in the city. And we ended up grabbing a guy named Mohammed Ibrahim al-Muslit, who was Saddam's courier, if you remember the name.
Yeah.
But Muslit, in less than about 4 hours of being in the detention facility there at Baghdad International, gave up, you know, Saddam's location, said he was with his personal chef, Case the cook, and Case had a family farm and had a house in town there outside of Tikrit in the town of Samara. And yeah, so, you know, less than 24 hours after catching that guy, we hopped in trucks, drove up north. The guys had conducted a close target reconnaissance with Muslit and had him point out a couple of things, the farmhouse and then the house in town. And that night we did a split troop. So one troop took the farm, my troop took the house in town, hit the house. We recovered the personal chef, and the guys that hit the farmhouse actually came up dry. It was a dry hole.
Yeah.
So they had radioed back to us. We ended up putting the chef in a vehicle and driving him out to try to get him to point out the farm. And yeah, lo and behold, Muslit, in a last-ditch effort to protect Saddam, had pointed out the wrong farm. So the boys were one farm off.
Jeez.
But, you know, they hadn't done it all completely blacked out and quiet, so they hadn't made any noise.
They hadn't spooked him
Nah.
in his position.
So yeah, so they shifted over to the next farm, cleared the farm, and yeah, ended up finding him there.
I remember that. I mean, it was such a fucking poignant time. You know, obviously he was the number one and everybody was after him. How did you feel when you actually got there? And well, what was your role on that? Can you remember?
Yeah, I mean, we hit the cook's house, so I was the team breacher at the time.
Yeah.
So, you know, I made explosive entry into the courtyard and into the house. We grabbed the cook. I think I was always one guy off the guy.
Yeah.
So, you know, my team specifically had grabbed the guy that gave him up the night prior, so that was pretty cool and significant. But the night that we caught him, man, I was just happy that we got him.
It was a success, yeah.
I've told people for years, like, we all jokingly, we thought, do we get to go home now? And as you and I both know, that's never the case.
That was just the start of it.
Yeah.
So did you actually physically get to see him?
Yeah. They brought him back. We flew him back to the house that we were based out of there in Tikrit. And when we walked him out to the bird to fly him down to Baghdad International, we were all able to see him be walked out. And so even if you weren't right there when they grabbed him, you at least got to see his face and know that we'd accomplished that task. So
what was he like when you got him?
You know,
was he defiant? Was he?
Yeah. I mean, he actually said, and it's been written about in books. I wasn't there, so this is secondhand, but he actually said, "I'm Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, and I want to negotiate." But
I'll swap you for a chef.
Yeah, the funniest thing I saw him do was when we brought him back, when we walked him out to the aircraft, when he started to walk out into the room, he knew he was in front of a lot of people. Yeah. And as disheveled as he was, he tidied himself up before he walked out.
Wow.
And it just, you know, it was like a little snapshot into his mindset, like that the narcissism that was that man. Yeah, I mean, he'd been on the run for at least 9 months at that point, so. I'm kind of surprised he lasted that long. I'm surprised he stayed in the country, and I'm surprised that it took us that long to find him. But yeah, if it wasn't us, it'd have been you guys. I mean, we were all working the same target set.
I remember it was a neck and neck. Don't tell him what we've got. Don't. We talk about sharing the information. We're not going to tell you, but you obviously had a better lead than we did, and great job.
Guess we'll sit, huh?
Yeah.
So, you know, you and I could chat for days. I think folks from the SAS and folks from the Delta Force, besides historically being tied together, I think they're very similar people. But are there any differences that you can think of that stand out?
I mean, differences is it's always equipment. I think the mentality of the people, the type of people, the camaraderie, the banter, the dark humour is always going to be the same. I think we always see you as our rich cousins. The SAS and with Delta. I mean, you've got all the gear, all the state-of-the-art stuff. We're all ragtag and always borrowing off you. That's a massive difference that we see. We don't get sort of funded or looked after as well as you guys do. And you people love your food.
Yep, I do.
You do. Americans love their food. Where the Brits will live on a 24-hour ration back for 4 days, where the Americans have got to have the right food at the right time.
We eat,
remember. But I also feel, with that in mind, is we always, the regiment's renowned for always going back to basics. Now, I might be talking out of turn, and I don't know if you guys do that. I think you rely more than we do on technology and state-of-the-art equipment. Whereas we'll always go right back to basics on everything, like navigation. You know, we're still silver compass, map, you know.
Yeah. I think they've definitely embraced, and I can only speak from my time, but I think we then, and I would assume now too, they've definitely embraced advancing with technology. I do still think the fundamentals lie in being a master of the basics, so that's always going to be there. I think for me, it's funny that you said that about funding and kit, because that was something that I noticed early on in my work with your unit. Was that we did seem to have more toys, and it's just tied to defense funding. I understand it. But I think the other big, operational difference, just in layman's terms, I think is that you guys have a domestic mission as well. Yeah. And we don't. We can't in the States. And I think that brings some different things, because you never know when something's going to come up right here at home.
Yeah.
And that's something that we don't have to worry about there in the States.
Yeah, that's a good point. The foundations of what we, for many years living with terrorism on our doorstep is a great foundation to all our soldiering, and we use an element of that in everything we do. And I think I remember the first time working alongside you guys, I felt we had that little bit more experience because of that. That one sort of, I felt we were one step ahead. I don't feel that's the situation now. The world's developed and we're training a lot more together, and the last 20, 30 years has been counter-terrorism sort of fighting anyway. But I think, maybe at the start, my early days, I remember, that background that we had was something I always felt kept us a step ahead of you. But I mean, obviously, we've been fighting this war together for the last 20, 30 years, and the camaraderie, the people, everything.
Yeah. Well, I got a funny story for you. So
Go on.
I used to wonder how, spooky, how secretive the SAS was compared to the unit. And the unit is pretty specific. When you're in the organization, you don't talk about it, you don't share anything.
Yeah.
While I was still in the unit, we came over to the UK one time, and we were up in Hereford, and we were doing some work with the boys. And the very first night we were there, they're like, all right, come on, we're gonna go out to the pub. Again, I'm a young Delta Force operator, don't tell anybody anything about me, and I'm an American in a foreign country, for lack of a better term, even though they speak English. And so they take us to a pub downtown. We walk in, we weren't there for 5 minutes. I think we got a pint and sat down in a booth, and this young girl, couldn't have been 17, 18 years old, walked up to our table and said, "You lads are the Delta Force bunch, right?" And I thought, come on. So apparently the guys had pointed us out, and I don't know if people knew who they were.
Someone from America sent a telegram saying, hey, our boys are coming, you'll know who they are. Better suntans, more money, better looking.
I think they set us up, but yeah, I've always laughed at that. So Billy, obviously, you had a much longer career than I did, but we both spent quite a bit of time in the service and in special operations. What do you think was one of the most difficult moments for you during your time, particularly in the SAS?
I mean, it's what everybody will say is when you lose a comrade.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for us, we lost, we were a very small unit, and to lose one person was a big deal.
Yeah.
And of course it is anyway, because he's your comrade. So it wasn't so much being there when they were killed, because we accepted. I think we talked about this earlier. You just thought, that happens, and if that
you knew that it could. So
yeah. And if that person had the choice again, of course they wouldn't want to get killed, but they'd still go back on that next mission.
Yeah,
that was the risk we all sort of signed up to. But where it really hurt, and what was hard, was when you came home to the funeral.
Yeah.
And I always remember, it sticks in my mind, fucking sharply. I remember standing at the side of the grave and then seeing my mate's wife and the two kids just stood there holding hands and looking into that grave. And we're stood there thinking, was this worth it?
Yeah.
And I think it takes a while for it to soak in and go, yeah, okay, it was worth it. Let's pick ourselves up and go again.
Yep.
So that really was, and we went to a lot of funerals, as probably you did as well.
Right.
And it was just that moment, that final moment of seeing their family, particularly the kids, looking into that grave and going, that's the last time they'll ever see their father or anything of their father again. So for me, that was probably the hardest times and moments. What about yourself? Probably similar?
Yeah, very similar. Lost a lot of mates over the years, but for me, kind of the turning point and I had some mental health struggles post-service, but kind of the turning point for me, and I didn't really understand it at the time, but in 2005, I missed a rotation. So I took a rotation off to do some training, do a training course, and I didn't deploy. And on that deployment, I lost a teammate, my team got shot up, another squadron mate was shot and killed, and my best friend was shot and killed on the target. And I didn't know, I knew nothing about like survivor's remorse or survivor's guilt.
Yeah.
And when I think about now, now I know there was nothing I could have done about that. That course of events was going to happen whether I was there or I wasn't there. But for a lot of years I struggled with that, with not understanding why I felt this big empty hole because my best mate died and I wasn't there.
I guess that big thing is the if. If I'd have been there, that wouldn't have happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Or would it have been me? Or it's a very complex emotion, but
I get it. I mean, I've never really suffered that much about it. I have my moments when something like that, thinking about the funeral, thinking about a good friend, the last words I said to him, being there, that stuff. I just go quiet. I'll go and have a drink, play some certain music, just sit on my own, and that's how I get through it. I have a horrible feeling maybe later on down the line it'll come and slap me right in the face, which it sounds to me it probably did with yourself. But what I have not struggled with, but realised is, you know, because for years I thought, I don't get it. How come I don't suffer like these people do? Perhaps it is a matter of time. And then a good friend of mine, unfortunately, committed suicide.
Yeah.
And I was like, even today, you know, I can't work out how, why.
Right.
You know,
Just doesn't
and
make
that
sense.
really risked me apart. After all the things he's been through and what he's done, to then, you know, unfortunately take his own life. I mean, it's a massive issue, and it's just, when it manifests, who knows, you know, and I don't feel it as really with me. I find my dark spaces and I just go and drink, not myself stupid, but I just, you know, my wife knows it's coming, I'll just go and sit at my own, play some music, do my thing, and just remember, as I call absent friends, and just try and pick up and move on again.
Yeah.
But it sounds like, I mean, you went through a pretty tough time, right?
Yeah. It was a myriad of things. It was loss, you know, of friends and coworkers and whatnot over the years. But then, you know, I left the unit abruptly. So I had a neck surgery towards the tail end of my career in special operations, and I was given some prescription medication. And, you know, if you know anybody that's taken prescription narcotics for a while, it's a very easy thing to very quickly become a part of your everyday life.
Yeah, mask the realities of what you're suffering with and take a new control of your life.
So, you know, I found myself in 2009, 2010 time frame. You know, this is looking back. I had an addiction to prescription painkillers that started as a result of an injury and some surgeries. I was self-medicating with alcohol. And then I had all of these things like the loss of Mike in 2005 that I bottled up for all these years, you know, just stuck in the box and drove on and did the job. And I think it just caught up to me. And, it, you know, like you said, some people deal with it, some people don't. The reason that I share my story is hopefully because I consider myself a pretty regular guy that was fortunate enough to do some pretty interesting things. But it's to show people that it can happen to anybody. Yeah. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how strong you are, how fit you are, how mentally tough you are, that circumstances can add up and put you in a position and you don't understand how you got there. So for me, 2010, I sort of hit rock bottom and I almost took my own life. Whoa. Which is a heavy thing to say, but I'm completely comfortable with talking about that now because I have gotten educated on how I got there, why I got there. And for me, the way that I got there was a medical diagnosis. I went to see a doc, a psych that I knew, and I said, look, man, I'm not doing well. I feel like a burden on the world, and I don't know how to fix myself. And the first thing he did was he sent me to a bunch of appointments. And those appointments led to a traumatic brain injury diagnosis that I didn't even know I had. They explained to me that physically I had done some damage to my brain and that those physical injuries were manifesting in the mental health spectrum for me. So they were affecting my physical actions, behaviors, and how I processed information. And that for me was a huge stepping stone because I could recognize, I could see that. I could go, yeah, man,
can relate to it and understand it.
I'm injured.
I found when we left, because we're alpha males, you don't want to talk about it. You think you can deal with it. Yeah. And I think I'm still in that phase where I can deal with this. I don't need help at the minute. But I hope if I do get into that situation, I'll ask for help. But I also found I didn't get any help from the military. When I left, there was no, and I know the tempo of what we were doing in special ops, you know, special forces, it was constant war, conflict.
For 20 years?
It was solid. There was never a decompression moment that I recall. No. I'll tell you what I believe is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the problems we have with our mental issues within squaddies, soldiers, is, so, like you just said, if I'd have gone, my unit might not have been in that shoot-up, my mate might not have died. It's that guilt feeling.
Yep.
And I know I've been in situations downtown, I had a few beers with blokes and people go, you're looking at each other and somebody's died and you're thinking, I'm looking at you thinking, mate, you could have probably done something about that. And you're probably thinking to me, you could have saw it. So we never have that conversation.
At least that's what you tell yourself in your head. Yeah.
And then that builds up and builds up, like saying, at some stage, that's going to explode.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about the decompression phase. So I figured that out on my own.
Yeah.
Like, I have always enjoyed the outdoors, but I was fortunate to meet my now wife later at the tail end of my career. When she met me, I was in a pretty rough spot. I was on the uptick from bottoming out, but I was doing pretty bad. And I knew if I wanted to keep her, I had to start to communicate and explain some of those things that I had dealt with, that I had been through. And the best place I found to do that was in the outdoors.
Yeah.
So we got into hiking and mountaineering. And what I found was when we're in the backcountry together, when we're out in an open, wild space like this, when you spend more than a couple days out there, the rest of the world just kind of melts away.
And I think, you know, when you do find that, you can get all that noise off the table and realise what's really important to you. You've done your best. The one thing is, you can't change history. It's happened. It's done. So you've got to accept it. You've got to get on with it. You know, looking back on all of it, mate, I don't think there's a lot I would change. You know, if I could go back and do it all again, I would. I mean...
You said there's a lot you would change or a lot you wouldn't change? Change? Yeah,
no, I mean, you can't change the outcome of an operation, and that's part and part of what we do. You know, the risk and the excitement of going in and doing stuff. And, you know, it makes it all worthwhile, I think. But
no, I say that a lot too. Like, all the good and all the bad made me who I am today and got me to where I am today, which is a much better person than I was a long time ago. So I wouldn't change a bit of it.
We can do your job, but you can't do our job.
The SBS go underwater, the SAS walk on water. That's the difference, isn't it?
We're above it, mate.
Let's just shake hands on it. Pash, we've done the same selection. Let's shake hands on it, mate.
Oh, yes.
Bulldog.